Since the start of 2020 up until about 2 weeks ago, Ursula Papandrea was the interim IWF President, the person at the very top of our sport. With the goal of total reform for the sport in an attempt to preserve its Olympic status and increase the fairness of participation and even the ethicalness within the executive board, she stood on a few toes, including the toes of those who had the power in numbers to vote her out. In this interview, Ursula spoke about the moment she found out that Nicu Vlad of Romania had called for a secret meeting to vote her out of the IWF, the depths of corruption that she witnessed during her 9 months in charge, how ultimately Tamas Ajan, though indeed still guilty, may have been somewhat of a fall guy for the rest of the board who continued to peddle bribery and drugs, her resignation, and the remainder of the McLaren Report that she never released to the board and or us. A huge thank you to Ursula for taking the time to talk to me and all of us, and for working so tirelessly in the right direction for the sport. Enjoy the podcast.
Hi guys, welcome to the show. My name is Seb Ostrovich, aka the Voice of the People, and this is the Weightlifting House podcast. Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of the Weightlifting House podcast with your host Seb Ostrovich, the Voice of the People, joined by an incredibly special guest. We have the People's Acting President herself, Ursula Papandrea. Ursula, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
Tired?
I don't know if you should use the word president anywhere near my name, but I'm good.
No, perhaps not.
I'm neither president nor vice president of anything. Certainly an advocate for the athletes.
Mm-hmm. Can you give perhaps a snapshot of the last sort of 12 months quickly for you? Because the last time I saw you was in Rome, and it must have been literally weeks before you became appointed as the interim president. So it's been a crazy 10 months for you. What's a snapshot of that?
It was like a week. And we had already started with the Oversight and Integrity Commission looking for and had procured an investigator, which was Richard McLaren. And there was a lot of doubt about whether I was going to get someone legit for the investigation. Mm-hmm. And before I got to Rome, apparently people were just like talking. Saying basically that it was just, none of it was real, because I had a working relationship, obviously, with Dr. Ajan and other members of the executive board. None of that means that I'm not going to try to do the right thing. I just have to work with these people. And I like many of them, but it's not a personal issue. It's a matter of ethics and integrity of the body a whole. And if this investigation was to be cleared up, either yes or no, we needed a legitimate investigation. And when McLaren was selected by the Oversight and Integrity Commission, I think that shut everybody up. They're like, oh, she's not bullshitting. Yeah. And I'm never bullshitting. Like, that's not my style. I tend to address things head on, and it's not a style that people appreciate because it's not really political in nature. Mm-hmm. Being straightforward and honest is usually not the way to win political points. And so it's no surprise to me that along the way, I've not really won the kind of political support, except from I think athletes and the countries that know the problems of the IWF and understand the depth of the issues. And to be honest, when I first stepped in, I knew that there was really questionable activity. I didn't realize the depth of the roots of that. Mm-hmm. And as I uncovered more and more along the more recent months and tried to combat it or correct it, it was not well received. But from that point, we went through the investigation. And then I ran a vote without even notifying the other board members. There had been some discussion about it, but I kind of tend to think, okay, there's a time to take a vote, and you just got to do it. If you're going to do it, you have to just answer to what you really want to do. And so I had sent out, on a Friday night, I think it was, a letter to the executive board outlining many of the things we had discussed, and said, we're taking a vote. And then the vote was concluded, but never recorded. Mm-hmm. And before it was, Dr. Ajan resigned.
Right. And so why, or how was it that you became the person that replaced him? Were you just the kind of the successor, or was there something more to it?
Well, the successor would have been Intl, the one that they just put in temporarily from Thailand. And he had declined. And technically the next in line, according to voting, was me.
Right.
But as you've seen even now, when they've gone through the series of vice presidents, one of which is really good, mm-hmm. I think he would have been the best choice. Mm-hmm. You kind of exhaust that line. And that's why right now, Dr. Irani has ended up as president, interim president. I mean, there is enough of an awareness, it appears, to, I don't know what happened with the Thailand thing, mm-hmm. how that passed it as a good idea, but I wasn't there, so mm-hmm. I that meeting where they removed me, I had scheduled a meeting for the next day. Right. I didn't schedule that meeting as interim president. Nicu Vlad said, we're going to have a meeting, and I said, okay, I'll schedule it for the next day. I had just gotten to Turkey. I needed to, this is of utmost importance. It was like, no, this was of utmost importance back in June. Yeah. When I first tried to address these things. Now, all of a sudden, you've decided it's of utmost importance. But I decided that on June 21st, when I asked for an integrity commission, when I asked for a reform and governance commission, and we actually appointed people in July, and then they removed those people. So it was only an emergency because they had either stopped what I was doing, mm-hmm. or undid what had been done. So now, of course, they turn it as if I didn't do anything, like results because of your actions. And they just, at this point, the way I look at it is there's just a lack of accountability or responsibility. And it's just easier to hang it on me and then push me out. The unfortunate thing for them is that other people know the truth. So, they may be able to tell all the member federations what they want them to hear or know, but the people that were around me at the time, including the executive board, they know what really went down. But if you get past the resignation of Dr. Ajan, that's when I was really able to start. There were incidents and things that happened that are already known and recorded and all of that. So I don't want to get into all that kind of stuff while I was acting president, but Ajan was still there. It wasn't really till May that I did a couple of things in April that were regarding our doping issues, signing the CAS ADD agreement, which we've just been sitting there apparently, and some other, anti-doping actions to try to secure us. But when I got in power, really, which was May, immediately there was resistance. Mm-hmm. So, my sense has always been that I was put in to remove Ajan, because if it failed, my head would roll. Yeah. If it succeeded, then they could just remove it. But I don't think anybody else was willing to take the political risk. of potentially it failing and then them being out. And it's always been clear that my motivations aren't political in nature. They are to actually make things better for the sport. And I think that's exhibited in a lot of ways, but the fact that I was completely up for and to follow through in a way on all sides to get to the bottom of it and without concern for what the results would be on me personally and politically. And knowing, I can't levy exact accusations, but knowing the group I've been hanging around since then, the political motivations seem to be stronger than anything else. And that's, in my opinion, a huge detriment to the sport.
So
shall I continue? Because we're just in May.
So you had planned for this meeting to go ahead on the 14th, then Nicu Vlad decided he wanted one on the 13th. What was your meeting specifically going to be about? And when did you find out that Nicu Vlad had gone behind your back, had this meeting, they've ousted you?
Let me put everything in perspective.
Yeah.
We've had, I don't know, something like 12 executive board meetings. Insane.
Yeah.
And we had actually just had a meeting the Sunday before the IOC EB meeting, which was basically, somebody asked me for the agenda and I was like, I don't know, you wanted me to have this meeting. It's your meeting. Like, why am I supposed to have an agenda? You pressured me into having a meeting on that Sunday. And that was a Sunday. And it was just because I had moved to take a vote where they were going to have to make a decision as to whether they were going to keep the Reform and Governance independent members, one of which had already withdrew, but we had two that are absolute professionals. One reformed the IWF track and field, the other reformed IBU, both complete successful track records, well-known, well-respected. They tried to say I know them. I'm like, how the hell would I know those? Like, I run in the circles of IF reform experts. But we, when we did a search, we went to IWF and asked for recommendations, which they actually had given more recommendations after the board had decided that they didn't want to meet the terms that were required to keep these two. But they had already started sending in names before they were even removed. So it was clear to me they intended to remove them. And then there was a motion in that meeting in which I was supposed to ask the board if they wanted to continue to have a discussion, and a whole lot of discussion that will go on, and they just kind of kick the ball down the road. And then, as I said before, sometimes it's just time to make a decision.
Yeah.
And so instead of doing the little manipulative, go to the board and have more discussion and leave us in this limbo state, and then go to the IOC and act like we have these two people, here's their roadmap, which was extensive and exactly what we need because it was comprehensive reform of the organization. I made them make a decision whether they wanted to keep these people or not. And then they're like, well, that was not the motion. And I was like, yeah, but the motion was made by somebody from Reform and Governance that isn't even on the executive board. I think as the president, I have the right to make the motion to give me the information that I need to write the report to the IOC, which was already late because of this stalling. That led to a Sunday meeting where they were just basically there to tell me how mad they were for not doing things exactly as they want a puppet. Yeah. And they got the wrong chick if they want a puppet. Like they should have looked into, and truthfully, I think, since May, they've kind of threatened to remove me. So I was always kind of hanging by a thread, and I always felt that, and it was always kind of this looming threat, like, we're going to get rid of you. And I was just trying to get as much positive stuff done as I could while I was in, just like I was trying before from, January. Just want to get as much done that's good for the sport as I can get done, knowing that I was a temporary solution for them.
Right.
And so when I had that vote, then we had this meeting, and they're just, mad at me for making them vote on something they act like they weren't prepared to vote on it, but they have their way before. Like, they had some minutes for May 31st on June 11th, and they tried to say they just got them. I'm like, no, you just looked at them.
Yeah.
Like, because we resent them again, because you don't know where they're at in your email, because you don't check. They had, they always make up these kind of accusations that, and usually you can show them, okay, that's not true, and then they don't say anything else. But in this case, they were mad, and then I wrote the report to the IOC that was completely factual. It was just like, this is what happened, and this is what happened, and this is what happened, and this is what happened, this is what happened, and this is what happened, and they didn't like it because it was what had actually happened.
Who didn't like it? The IWF or the IOC?
Well, I think the IOC appreciates just a forthright description of what has transpired. The IWF board didn't look at it, as I was told, because it was exposing what was done and what wasn't done and when it was done. And we have a timeline with minutes and recordings that kind of show you when we did what. And there were times where I held on to something, hoping that we would get one thing done so we could do the next thing. And, they try to reframe these as delays. So, for example, Phil and I had started working on a safeguarding policy last fall, when Intl was still there, and Intl had supported it, and we had gone in and they created the link to look like we had one, but we never had one. So when I became president, I handed it over to the Women's Commission to finish up the work on it. Well, the work had been done. They've had it for 3 weeks. On the agenda for the 14th were to approve, they had received it on September 13th, to approve the safeguard, to appoint the members of Disciplinary and Ethics Commission, because I had started, once I realized they weren't going to do the Integrity Commission, because initially it was supposed to go to another commission to discuss, and I realized they would rewrite the terms of reference in a way that the board would control that Integrity Commission too, and should be independent. So after really kind of mulling it over, the best decision was, since we were filling out the Athletes Commission, or since I decided we should fill out the Athletes Commission, because it had been there this whole time and nobody had ever said anything like, hey, we should fill that out. The same thing was happening with disciplinary ethics. It didn't have a full membership according to the Constitution, which, by the way, in my opinion, is just a convenient tool for them to follow or not follow according to what suits them. I can give you tons of examples, one more recent. But I said, okay, well, we need to fill out disciplinary and ethics. I had given them plenty of warning and I had sent them a couple of times the bylaw that refers to composition, which is 3 members selected by the executive board. Well, nothing was ever submitted in that way. I had already found a list and had them vetted that were independent ethics officers of different sorts, different types of attorneys from different countries, and already had them looked over to ensure that they were the quality that we needed. They had finally created a list after prompting again and again through September. And so the week before, really starting the week before, because the 26th was the last meeting and I had mentioned it again, they started sending in names for disciplinary and ethics. which were completely theirs. So I said, that's I already have my 2 picks. Well, on the 14th, we were supposed to choose disciplinary and ethics. Well, I would have gotten 2 appointments as the president, because that's what the bylaws say. So by removing me on the 13th, they denied me the ability to appoint 2 of the 5 members of the Disciplinary and Ethics Commission. I think that was in part some motivation to get rid of me at that point in time. And then they framed everything else around that, they had removed the reform and governance. They voted for reform and governance people. It's like we had reform and governance independents that had been ASOIF approved and vetted, which is the Association of Summer Olympic International Federations, which is basically like a subcomponent of the IOC. We had followed all the right things to do in the right way, and they were rejected. So, and I never was able to establish an integrity commission, and I wasn't going to have someone else come in and write the term of reference say that vetted it. So that's why I ended up going disciplinary and ethics route, because it already existed. But a true independent integrity commission is what they want. And I'm not even going to go into one of the selections of that disciplinary and ethics commission. I'll let other people figure that out. Questionable, to say the least.
Yeah.
I also don't think you should be putting people from your own countries on these bodies.
No.
Well, yeah, who does? But they're there. So this idea of, and even if there is no real conflict of interest, it was one of the problems with me and Phil, and I completely understood that. It's the optics. The problem is Phil's not actually American. He's British. Right. I mean, he's American now. He's British, Canadian, and American. Triple dipper. But understanding, and it's one thing to have someone come in and do a professional job in the way that we were as a pair to clean up the sport. It's another thing to put people from your own country on an ethics commission or a governance reform commission, and you wrote the current constitution, which is the case with this executive board. There's a member of the executive board that actually wrote this constitution. And there are members besides that person that think this constitution is sound. And so they had to get, dragged along to admit that we need to, rewrite the Constitution. But it's not just the Constitution and bylaws. It's the entire system of governance that needs to be rehauled or overhauled. And the professionals that we had originally went to, Maria Clark and Jonathan Taylor, have that experience, right? They have that experience. They cost a bit of money, but they're not extraordinarily expensive in my mind. When you're recreating an entire new foundation, think of the value of that and then put it in perspective. So the same people that were willing to spend $1 million, which they weren't so happy about that either, but if that's what it took to get a proper investigation on ION, and then 1/3 of that to rebuild your entire federation. Right. I'm just not even going to go into how much money is spent on other things, because if I did, it would put it all into perspective. That it was what they were asking for is really a drop in the bucket compared to what we will spend money on. And I say we, the IWF, which I'm no longer part of. So, I mean, it's been very, very frustrating, trying, exhausting to have a group of people that are always pushing back, and in a combative way, like verbally combative way. And then when you stand up to try to defend yourself, you're acting like ION, and it's like you're yelling at me.
I mean, so how much of that, because I've often wondered, putting the disagreements over reforms aside, do you think that the executive board treated you poorly either because you're a woman or because you're American or both? Do you think that played into it?
I don't want to call them all misogynists, but we have our fair share.
Yeah.
It's clear I served a purpose that was astute of them to engage me for, right? But I think that very early on, I was not doing things exactly the way the leading voices were telling me to do. I was doing what I thought was actually correct. And this was interpreted as, you're not implementing the board decisions. They don't use the word implement, like you're not following the board decisions. It was like, well, your board decisions want me to intervene on 2 different occasions in the Thai doping case. I'm not going to do that. Your intentions or your decision, maybe not the decision, but the intentions of the decision, was that I lay supine and allow Ion to just ride out the investigation. Not going to do that. I mean, if you're going to ask me to do a job, I'm going to do it for real.
Yeah.
I'm not going to just create the facade that it's being done. And I think that helped me build trust with the IOC, but I obviously lost support from the IWF board in doing that. And they've made all sorts of claims like, oh, she's just doing this for her own political benefit. Blah, blah. I'm like, no, how does cleaning up the sport benefit me?
No, yeah.
It would benefit everybody if we took this seriously and really, really got down to setting what's, what any individual athletes and put all clean athletes in the forefront. And so many of like intervening in the Thai case. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
You can't intervene in a case. It's the whole idea of having another body to do things. So you want the ITA to take care of this, but now it's just, and the whole like stripping down of all of the members of all of the commissions in order to have them appointed by ITA. Great. It's a great idea. I'm curious to see the first time there's a decision that goes against somebody on the board, how they're going to react. Because the people that we had before on those commissions, not all of them, but for the most part, they were highly respected individuals. There's kind of a mixed bag, but the removal had to do with the decisions they had made regarding member federation sanctions, and they did with the people. Just those decisions affected 2 members of the executive board. And immediately there was a, instead of just saying, yeah, we have an excessive number of doping cases, and yeah, we should be punished. And yeah, we're gonna, we'll take it, and then we'll, like other countries have had to, and then we'll come back, we'll come back stronger or whatever. They tried to push back and fight.
Right.
Using the position, and it's one of the claims that I make against them in my resignation. I said something like, you don't know how to wield power and position responsibly. And that I think sums it all up, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's my
your
opinion.
Resignation letter was great.
I have.
Your resignation letter was great.
Okay, you read it?
Yeah.
I don't know where it's been or where it hasn't been.
It's on Inside the Games. Yeah, Brian Oliver posted it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And then, they made a retort to that and sent it to see could piece by piece just destroy. But it's just, I'm not sure it's even worth it, because they start to get really, really petty. And to me, none of this is some political game. Like, that's what I feel like. I'm like, there's pawns in this political game. I don't want to be in any stupid game. I just want to secure the sport, for as long as there's an Olympic Games. That's it. It's very simple. I mean, I don't know how hard it is to just do the right things. But I guess maybe if you feel like it threatens your own position, you would, people would resist it.
And I feel like there are maybe
I think
two ways.
You just face that, you just face the thing straight on. And if somebody decides you're not fit for the job, they decided I'm not fit for it according to their standards. And so, they put me down to vice president, and I said, I'm not going to have any effect because my voice obviously differs completely. I'm not going to continue to put myself through this, game. So I'd rather just my peace of mind and step out. I do want to respond to one thing that I've heard. But go ahead, you had another question. Oh, sure. There were where nobody's ever known what anybody makes in the Federation. They were going around telling everybody how much I was making and how much Phil was making. They were true. We were getting paid well. I just want to make sure everyone knows that I was getting paid half of what Ion got paid.
Wow.
And Phil was getting paid half of what Attila was getting paid. So, they're making all these claims about what we're getting paid and we're just doing it for money. But this is the same body that approved the amount of money that Ion was getting paid and then gave me half of that. And they were the same people that approved what Attila was getting paid and then gave Phil half of that. So we weren't going in this for money. We were trying to clean the sport up. And I think for them, what we were getting paid seems like a whole lot, and it was good, but by American standards, it's not completely mind-blowing.
Right.
Now, maybe if you live in another country, the amount of money sounds like, oh my God, people don't make that in a year. But it's not so completely unrealistic. Like, I've made the amount of money monthly that I was making working in the United States. I don't need the headache for that amount of money. If I really want to make that amount of money, I can hustle a little bit more and I can make that amount of money. I have months in my past that I've made that amount of money. So with less of a headache, a little more driving, a little bit more flying, but less of a headache, and actually enjoying what I was doing. So this whole idea that it was, I've never done, I was in the USA Weightlifting Executive Board from 2009 till I stepped out in 2017, which people seem to think was, no, I resigned as president when I was appointed as acting president, IWF, so last January. But that entire time, obviously, we don't get paid. And if anything, you spend money serving on the board.
Right.
And in the sport, I coached for decades, never receiving, the first time I ever got paid anything in the sport was in 2010 or 11, somewhere in there. I got paid for a seminar. But I mean, just this whole, and I'm just going to say this. There's one person on the executive board right now that makes nearly $500,000 a year, not between 4 and 5. Nobody's complaining about that. Nobody's complaining about that. They also had mentioned something in their complaint that I had made a motion to increase honorarium for them, not for me. I was going to take all of the money that was left that was supposed to go to Ion, and I redistributed it
to them
because they would not pay the deputy chair a stipend for being the deputy chair. And this was a vote right after they had approved to pay the advisor more money than I was asking for the deputy chair, who actually does a whole lot of work for coaching and research. And even though they approved double the amount of money in the motion before, they then wouldn't approve a $5,000 stipend for a person on the executive board that I know works incessantly for this board and works in a committee as a deputy chair. And there's a disparity between her position and the chair's position of close to $10,000.
Wow.
So just to give her half of that to put her in as a deputy, it's just, they pay who they pay when they want to pay them. They don't pay, you give money to this regional federation more than this regional federation. It's, make rules, make policy, and then follow that. Don't change the policies you don't like. Don't not abide by the Constitution when it doesn't suit you. I mean, this whole appointment of another member to the executive board, of the advisor going from advisor to the executive board, it changed the board composition directly in violation of the Constitution's board composition. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. Removing me, they violated my terms of reference as they were stated and approved. Nobody cared. I mean, they're going to care when they get notification from my attorney. They care then. But you just can't work all willy-nilly and do whatever you want whenever you want to do it because it suits you or benefits you politically. Or just make some rules and follow them. We rely on the ITA and we're so good. It's like, no, the ITA came in with an article about member federations sanctioning, and you tried to rewrite it. And then when the ITA gave us the new version that included the suggestions from the board, you rejected that too. So this idea that, we have the ITA doing everything for us. Well, the ITA is doing more than they did. And I'm not saying that we're not on the right path. I'm just saying, don't act like you don't try to intervene in what the ITA does. Don't try to act like you're not trying to intervene in cases, because I'm not going to lie for you about that.
Right.
The truth is the truth. If there is nothing to hide, why are you concerned?
Yeah.
Why can't I speak if there's nothing to hide?
That's the real question, isn't it?
Yeah.
That just sort of, that shows that they're guilty of something. So we've seen reports that you've required the backing from, I think it's 38 countries in order to try and trigger these early elections. What are the odds that will happen, and when, and what might the result of that be?
It would be for an extraordinary Congress. It wouldn't be an election.
Right.
But it would give us the opportunity for the Congress to approve or to make their voice known about doing a virtual election. I had originally suggested, and they kind of came around. They had good arguments against going to Lausanne because it's Switzerland's a little bit harder to get into and all that. But it's normal. It's normal to fly into a big hub and then to spend an hour on a bus to get to wherever you're going.
Yeah.
They, all of a sudden that became a big deal. Like from Geneva to Lausanne is, that's 2 hours. I'm like, no, it's an hour and 15 minutes max in a bus. Maybe if you take the train, it's a little longer. But, we're not putting anybody on a train necessarily. But they, I think they had good arguments for going to another city. But we already knew, I knew in January that there was really no real possibility that we were going to be able to have the Congress in January. I had actually suggested May and then came back to March. Other people suggested October, and January was just a compromise. My feeling is that if we don't do, and they've already declined twice to have virtual election,
Why is that? Why did they decline the virtual
constitutional stuff? Congress. One argument I kind of get there are people who don't necessarily have stable connections, but there are different types of election systems that can be used. And LUMI is the one that has been used by the IOC, by the international federations, and there are other options that will ensure that everyone can cast votes.
Right.
My sense is they want people there in person, because you can't, it's hard to influence and or pressure people if they're not there in person.
Yeah.
And we know from the issues in the past, my suspicion would be that that would be beneficial.
Definitely.
I agree that in person would be better for other reasons if we do it in Lausanne. But we're already looking, they've already looked at other cities and settled on Istanbul. And pretty sure it will be like Lausanne is just my suggestion from the past, and there's no real intent to have anything in Lausanne. I wanted to be in Lausanne because I wanted the IOC to be able to address the Congress. Well, you know, what are the chances that Bach or Kit or somebody else is going to go to Istanbul to address the Congress? I mean, I hope they do. It's important for the sport, but it's our sport and our problem. At the end of the day, the IOC gave us a bunch of rope and said, you know, you can build yourself you know, a way to climb out of this mess, or you can hang yourself with it. And I mean, people can make their assessment with how we've done in that regard. I was, you know, my intent was to get in the best people in the business and to rebuild the sport from the foundation. Just tear down everything we have and just rebuild an entirely new federation. And had started taking different steps. A lot of the work I had to do is really just getting us back to normal operations. You know, we had no accounting firm. We had to get an accounting firm. The auditors quit in the middle of June, so we had no audit, which was due at the end of June. It took us over a month to get an auditor because we got declined. And we found out in the last case that they did accept us, that we had issues because they do background checks on everybody, the secretariat as well as the board, and we had two problems that still haven't been addressed. And so it's really hard to decide how long you want to be involved with something that you see so clear. And the truth is, I wanted to quit more times than I can tell you.
I bet, yeah.
No, seriously. No, I mean, there would be days that I was like, this is it. I can't do this anymore. Like, it's like banging your head against a steel wall, not even a brick wall, something that has more fortitude than brick. At least you can chip brick. It was very discouraging and mentally exhausting. I wouldn't sleep for, like, the longest stretch that I didn't sleep was 50 hours. Because you're working with people that are on all different time zones, and they were clearly more involved with everything and anything than ever before. Yeah. And I wanted them to be included, but it just got to the point that there was, the interactions were no longer positive for me at any level. There was no progress being made. It was just, like raging against the machine, and yeah. So here I am on vacation.
Well, when I first heard that you had resigned from the board, I think my first thought was, oh no, this is a real shame because you're one of the people there who is fighting for change. And then I thought, well, maybe what it is with you leaving and then Ursula leaving, I thought maybe it's almost like a statement to say to other people who are on the board, if you're fighting for change, this isn't a board to be part of. And maybe that was almost what you were saying, more than there's no hope for this thing. It was like, let's actually, people who want to make a difference, let's actually leave and put pressure on the executive board, make sure that IOC sees what's happening, and something positive might come from it. Was that part of the decision as well?
Sure. Yeah, that was always what was going through my head. Like, do I want, as I saw the corner being turned and it getting worse, because there were some pivotal moments, pivotal events, decisions that were made that made clear statements, at least to me, that we were shifting our direction. Because there seemed at the beginning, even though there was kind of these kind of looming threats, it seemed like we started off making the right decisions.
Yeah.
It was really the follow through on those decisions where you started. I mean, we had on July 26th, we had appointed a reform and governance commission with experts that I mentioned, and as our independents. And I misled them about the cost, and I was like, well, first, you didn't ask about the cost. Second, the cost is commensurate with the cost of this type of reform by these levels of professionals. It might be a little bit more because you've got 2 stars, but it's not anything groundbreaking or mind-blowing. It's what it costs, and with no basis for comparison of what it cost, they just started mentioning that as a problem. And it's interesting because for the professionals that do this, when boards are resistant, that is usually an argument. They also gave us terms that were required for their engagement that were, I thought, completely reasonable. And some of which I thought, if we are more cooperative, this could go faster. If we're more cooperative, this could cost less. Like they're giving us a range because they don't know how much time and effort they're going to have to put into it. The more you spend on a 4-hour meeting, jacking around, not getting anything done, the more it costs, because you're using their time. So, I mean, I'd rather make the investment now, but everybody didn't agree with me, obviously.
Yeah.
They didn't agree with me on much by the end.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I see them doing stuff now that I had already started doing. I had already called the director of ITA and said, we need to get the new contract done. And actually, I tried to get it beefed up a little bit, which I'm not sure if they're going to do or not. I'd already started the, appointments for the Disciplinary and Ethics Commission. They were supposed to be done the next day. I'd already done reform and governance in July. So, we got this and this and this done. Well, they would have already been done.
Yeah.
And they were getting, so you weren't, it's not the way, I mean, it's being framed differently.
Yeah.
Than what it actually is. So, I mean, I understand they need to win brownie points, but they're not really fooling anybody, unfortunately.
No, they're not. Yeah, it's very transparent. I think everybody can see through it. One of the things, as fans, we don't get to hear a huge amount about how the top of the IWF works. And one of the things I've always been interested is, I think we like to look at it, at least as fans, as black and white, good and bad, pro-drug, anti-drug sort of thing. At the top in these executive board meetings, how overt are people with how much they will acknowledge the fact that there is bribery or that there is drug use? Is it very much just sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, or do people openly speak about these things?
They're absolutely offended if you even suggest it.
Really?
Of course, there's nothing like that going on. What are you talking about? I'm offended. I'm offended that you would even think that would happen.
So they won't take any, they just won't own up to it. They won't take, responsibility.
And that's what I mean. We started with, there needs to be an acknowledgement of what has gone wrong in the sport. Okay, Ion. Okay, Ion's gone. You can get over that. Ion didn't put, stanozolol in you. And if it was a coach or an administration that pressured the athletes into doing it, they should speak now. Mm-hmm. They should speak now and say, we don't want to own the responsibility for this. This was not our decision. Or it was the athlete's decision. And if it was the athlete's decision, then you have to find a way to, and we had started working on this, to get athlete support personnel directly tied to athletes. And whether it's somebody from their national team, a coach or a doctor or whatever, or if it's an individual. Like in the United States, all the athletes have their own doctors, their own physical therapists, they have their own coaches. So, fortunately, we don't have a doping issue, and we don't have a doping issue because we test the shit out of people nationally. No matter what your level is, we test. You don't see anybody in the top going and testing positive somewhere at an international competition because they're regularly tested. Mm. Could someone slip through? Potentially, but it's not highly likely. Mm-hmm. And when you have 8 positives, if you're going to tell me there's 8 people that were able to slip through your national doping, I'm going to tell you your national doping or anti-doping organization needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
So there's even I don't see accountability or responsibility on any of that. Where, there's always an argument against it. Well, so-and-so did it. We didn't know this, it was this. It was that. It's never just, we did it. You have to give some credit to somebody like Ilya who just owns up to it. And then has the balls to come back and do it all in a clean way and show this is what it is. Mm-hmm. I have an enormous respect for him for doing that, not for doping, but for stopping and then showing up to competitions clean. Mm-hmm. That is owning what you've done. And even I'm not sure that he is the only person responsible in his history. No. But, he's taken personal responsibility for it. Yeah. And that's the way it should be. For me, those are the people that you can, forgive and admire. But if all you do is deny, or blame someone else or shift the blame or don't want to be punished, then how are we ever, if you can't acknowledge a problem, how are you ever going to fix it? Mm-hmm. And that's, they're only willing to acknowledge that there was one problem, Ion, mm-hmm. but they don't want to acknowledge the complicity with Ion for decades. Mm-hmm. And that Ion could not have ever operated in the way he operated alone. Yeah. There's just no way. Mm-hmm. And, as much as I, like everyone else looks and says, okay, there was blame there. I have never, ever thought that he was the only problem in the sport. Mm-hmm. He was maybe part of a bigger problem. Mm-hmm. And so to me, throwing him completely under the bus is not fair. Yeah. It's not fair. Yeah. And it becomes a very convenient. And what I do know is in the recent years leading up to the removal or resignation of Ion, he was pushing for, real reform. And I'm not saying before
Really?
that he was, but yes. And that was the only reason that I could really get on board with what he was doing, because we were actually holding countries responsible. We were, there was no playing around so much. I mean, there was a point in time, I think with ITA, where there was a little too much interacting, where, you know, results reporting needed to all go to the ITA. I think some of the arguments they gave for why they hadn't were valid. It didn't mean that we still shouldn't have done it. It was a little gray. It was a gray area. But I do know that he was trying to do what wasn't done before, and whoever you want to blame for that, and that created a lot of animosity towards him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was one system, and now there's a new system, right? And so the new system was not conducive to the operations of the old system. So I think he was a convenient, there were other things in the past that were found by the McLaren investigation, but I think he was a kind of a convenient fall guy in that regard. And I would like to say that there was, once he resigned, that there was an intent to change all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But that has not been what I saw, you know. So there's a little part of me that thinks maybe his removal had less to do with what everybody thought he had been doing in the past than with what he was actually trying to accomplish now.
Really?
Yeah. And I'm not saying he's like innocent or
no, of
even
course.
guilty. I'm just saying my observation was that because nobody seemed to have a problem with all the rumors and speculation. And I mean, I've been in the sport since 1987. My first World Championships was in 1992.
Yeah.
The word on the street hasn't changed for the last 30 years as to the rumors.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow, he was able to hold on.
Mm.
Who allowed that?
Yeah, people had to have been complicit.
Who allowed that?
Yeah. Do you think, going back to Ilya quickly, do you think that there would be a benefit to putting someone like him on the athlete executive board so that there's some level of conversation between those who have always been clean and want to remain clean, and a better understanding of why athletes from other parts of the world competed dirty in the way that they did?
I actually do think there's a benefit. I think from the optics perspective, it would just not be a smart thing to do.
Yeah.
I do think he has something really important to add to the overall conversation.
Yeah.
Because I think if we really, really want to solve this problem, we have to, this is not just about, oh, we're American and we do everything right. This is about what happened to the sport that we got to this point. How and why are we here? And how do we get out of it and get the result that we want, which is to provide a clean playing field for all athletes.
Mm.
The one thing I can say is, being in the United States as an athlete, I always felt like if I went and won national championships, then at least I was, for the most part, in a clean playing field.
Yeah.
And so you felt like you won. You go to the World Championships and, you do something great and you're, 8th or 10th or 20th. And you're like, so these guys, I'm not sure how many. I mean, You just never know where you stand. And that's really frustrating for a clean athlete. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different frustrations, but we understand that sports on the whole we're not the only dirty sport. And that's really not the point for me. and I hear that, well, we're not the only dirty ones. It was like, well, so another country being dirty, another sport being dirty doesn't help our situation. That just means they have a problem too. So it shouldn't be used to excuse anything. Back to Ilya, I would like for him to be able to have a platform for a voice. I'm not sure an official spot would be, because of the level of the violations. If it was something, less severe, then I think it can be, well, this is what he's doing now. I do differentiate between stanozolol or an anabolic agent and an amphetamine that's in a cough medicine. I mean, there's a difference. Or even something that's in a supplement that has been shown to be in a supplement. There's a difference. There's absolute intent to cheat, and there's some accidental, incidental, adverse findings. And there's a big difference to me between those. And then there's some that are probably in the middle, and that's why you have other entities to make decisions about it. I will say that and they haven't really done anything, but I urge them to, and they have terms of reference. We created an Olympic Games anti-doping task force to kind of look into what we could do and to write up a document for the ITA to give insight and information on how athletes dope, why athletes dope, what testing cycles look like, and in just more general like intelligence that would be helpful, because not everybody in the ITA understands our sport.
Right.
So I understand what you're saying, and I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah.
But I do think taking a seat on the athletes commission and giving it to somebody who's clearly, and maybe there is, like a limitation on that, like a point at which if you've been clean for the last 8 years,
then you can,
then you're, like put a sanction on it and then make them eligible because they're clean. Then they're representing clean athletes. But I wouldn't want to take a seat from a current clean athlete. I have a friend who's a high level coach who tested positive when she was really, really young. And I say like in her teens for diuretic. Like how long are we gonna, obviously diuretics can be masking agents, but clearly she was not using it as a masking agent, and we move on. I think there are more serious offenses and less serious offenses in that, and it's all falls under the same category, but it's like people who got punished for smoking pot.
Exactly. So I guess one of the final things I'd love to know,
which is usually not accidental.
Is can you give us, any reasons to be hopeful about the future of weightlifting? Are there things that do you look to the future of weightlifting and think we might get through this? Whether that's because the IOC takes over like they did with boxing, or because we have a total reform. Is there a bright future possibly?
That's a terrible question. That's a terrible question for me. Let me start with, do I think the right people can get in the next election that would engage in total reform? And what level of confidence do I have in the people that are currently engaging in reform? With the latter, it's low. With the former, it's low.
Okay.
I would like to see a slate of people that are not as deeply politically involved in the last 30 years run, or even the last 10 years. There are a couple of challenges there. One is getting people to run on a slate if there's a strong sense that they're not going to win. Right? Because then you put yourself in the way of reprisal by people who are kind of known to engaging in reprisal.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's worth trying doing. I'm just not, I don't have this kind of overwhelming confidence that I know exists on the other side. Like there's no way they're going to remove us. It's the same kind of, I think, arrogance that has always permeated the organization, and that the same people have the same positions and they're secure and they're coming back and they're going to do their thing the way they do it, and it's all going to be the same, status quo. Do I think there's pressure on them to do more of the right things now? Yes.
Yeah.
But there are some really obvious things to do right now that they haven't done.
Right.
Very obvious. And I'm not even going to point them out because I think they're so blaringly obvious that I shouldn't even have to say them.
Okay.
You want to tell me what is really, I feel like I'm prompting you. What is really obvious about the composition of this board? That would be one of the first and easiest things you could do.
What is one of them?
Yeah. If you were on this board and you wanted to make sure that the IOC knew everybody on this board was legitimately concerned with just the sport, what would you do with them? I know what I would do with them, and I was planning on doing it.
Well, to some extent, open them up to an audit or some level of investigation, I suppose.
They knew that was on my plate to do. And we don't have any other body but disciplinary and ethics to do it with. Guess who was not able to put anybody on disciplinary and ethics?
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be disciplinary and ethics because those members were selected by the board. It should be a separate integrity commission that exists outside, that we go to the IOC or we go to IWF when we ask them, can you please put together a body for us? And we want to run every single member of this executive board through that because we want to show you that we're all completely clean. And I was willing to subject myself to that. And if they come back and tell me, we don't think you're good enough to serve on this executive board, then you step to the side. Like you shouldn't be scared of that or worried about it or not be willing to make the suggestion yourself that this is what we should do. And that's, there's this whole, I'm surprised you haven't asked about it, probably because I haven't shut up. This whole controversy around the private report that the board has been trying to get a hold of against the explicit instructions of the investigator.
I was going to ask about that because I don't think some people know, not everybody knows that there's still more to the McLaren report that you have. Are you going to release that at some point? Like, how is that going to come about?
The appropriate authorities and entities have it.
Okay. That's good to know.
The executive board had, and this was one of the concerns, had a long history of leaks, a history of leaks, including the email that I sent to the board about Ajan, because that could have all just happened and we got a resignation and it wasn't a big deal. But that's not how it happened, because someone on the executive board, which are the only people this went out to, put it out there. And that's just one of, there's no sense of real confidentiality on things that involve personnel. And that was this particular case. It wasn't something that was open that could be seen, from the outside. These were, in internal workings that had and I'm not saying it needed to be hidden, but I do think that there was a way to respect Dr. Ajan during that process.
Yeah.
And this removed that level of respect that he's owed, that anybody is owed. And it was, it was to harm a person. So those kinds of leaks are not just, me telling you about a decision that is going to be in the minutes and will be made public, right? Or that's already been made public, or things that are unconstitutional and that are obvious if you've read the Constitution and you watch what's happening. So there's a problem with leaks. That's one thing. There's another problem in that the organization was left, I'm just going to say insecure from potential suit. That was another thing. And then there is the limited time of the investigation, along with the limited travel from COVID, meant that the investigation was not ever really complete. And information it comes in now that is not included. That would be helpful to a full investigation. But if it's supposed to be private and it's going to be leaked, which it will be, or if it's going to open us up to potential suit, which it could, and if there are names in there of members of the organization that would cause them to act in a way to preserve, to delegitimize the document itself so that they can preserve themselves. I think there is good reason to not make it a public document. And it doesn't have to be me that makes the decision. That was the investigator's decision.
Yeah.
But I understand the arguments that were made, and everybody should understand that. And I think they think because I have it, I feel that way. But the truth is, I actually tried to reject having it.
Right.
Discussed as to whether it would be given to the Oversight and Integrity Commission. I had suggested that we just don't take it. Like, distribute it to whomever needs it. And we don't need to know if everybody on the board doesn't know. Yeah. I personally did not want to know what everybody else on the board doesn't, or have access to something that everybody on the board has access to. And if you were in those meetings, this was a discussion that we had. And there were some members that thought we had a responsibility of knowing. And there were others that were like me that thought we shouldn't even accept this thing. It was decided that we would give the document over to an integrity commission, which was proposed on the 21st and has never come to fruition because it was blocked at that point. And then there was, they wanted to send it to another commission that would look at the terms of reference, which again, I thought would become gutted in a way that, or the composition be altered so that it wasn't truly independent. So decided, well, we have disciplinary and ethics, let's just go there. So I don't know if I made the right decision or not, like to keep fighting for an integrity commission, but I don't think it would have been, I mean, as evidenced by what we ended up with in the other commissions, I don't think it would have been fully the level or the type of independence that I thought we needed.
Yeah. Well, I feel like whether or not people do it.
I think I didn't answer the question about whether there's hope for the organization.
Well, you sort of did, and it was a bit pessimistic, so I moved on.
I think at this point, there have been such a long series of wrongs, and there has been so much latitude extended to us that I think it would just be a big ask to go back and, like, how long can you just violate the norms of good governance and doping? I mean, we've just been given so many warnings. And when the things that I would tell the executive board about what we should do in accordance with what the IOC would expect us to do, were not just like I was saying them. They were out in the public sphere. Like, okay, fine, they don't trust me. They think somehow I'm benefiting from a clean sport. Just me, nobody else. It's just mine. I don't understand why there was, why we wouldn't have just taken every single step we could have taken. And if they needed, discussions with other members of the IOC to know the expectation. I feel like enough was put out there publicly by the IOC that it wouldn't have been hard to do. It really wouldn't have been hard to do the things they were asking us to do. Not hard. That's what's so upsetting. Yeah. I do think that there was some groups from within the board that didn't want me to be successful. So there's a chance that now they'll do the right things, but the question is it too late? Yeah. I do know that there were, that one of the kind of accusations was that I would frame things as an I and a me. And I'm like, well, it was my initiative and you never thought of it. You've been on the board for decades. So why should I say we? Yeah. You wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't asking you to do it. Let's just be honest. And that's what I'm saying about, just being accountable for what you've done and what you haven't done. And hey, I didn't do these things while Ajan was around. Safeguard policy, okay. I mean, I understand there's some things that they weren't in a position to ask for. I wasn't by myself, but as a group, there was a majority on that board that could have done a lot. And we know that because of what we saw with Ajan, right? So as board, I mean, not one person individually, but as a board, the board could have decided as a group to do the right things. And I think there have been moments in our history where the board has done the right thing, but somehow it's slipped off. And I think that history itself is what creates the pessimism. It's like, okay, we take 2 or 3 good steps and then fall back. But I do think there are people within the board that just wanted to make sure I failed. Yeah. And so the best thing for them to do is to push me out and then to do the things that we had already started working on, that I had already started working on with them.
Which is about as petty as it gets.
Well, it's hugely irresponsible, because you put all of these athletes at risk. I mean, I really need another pat on the back, like a hole in the head. I'm good. I've done plenty of things that I'm proud of in my life. Yeah. Like I think I've already exceeded any potential of a little Mexican girl that was, grew up in the situation I grew up in. Exceeded it. I exceeded it when I earned a master's degree or even a bachelor's degree. Like the expectations of my life, I'm absolutely. I could die tomorrow and I would be happy that I have given back to the sport and done with my life what I could. So I don't want credit. I don't need credit. I just want people to do the right thing.
Well, we'll give you some credit. I feel like everybody who's a fan of weightlifting or,
but I'm just saying I don't need it.
Of what you've done.
It's not, that's not why you do things. That's
No.
It's not the right motivation. And if it's your motivation, I think that really sullies what you do.
Yeah.
And you lack clarity.
Because then you just go by popular opinion over,
Yeah.
I guess, values or morality. Yeah. So what do you think, just to sort of wrap up, what might be the role of, weightlifting media companies like Weightlifting House and then the general weightlifting fans at large? Like, are there things that we and they can do to help with this situation?
I think using your voice the same way, the whole athletes commission, I mean, that thing had been sitting there unfilled. And I'm not putting Tom Gogeber in any, I mean, he's a great guy, and I know he did what he could where he could and represented the athletes when he was, given the opportunity. But we should have athletes on every single commission. We should have athletes on the executive board. I know I am putting the expectations of, my experiences onto an international federation, but these aren't just trumped up by me. I mean, these are IOC expectations for, gender equality and good governance reform and athletes representation. Like, how we got to this point and we didn't have some actual athletes commission in place with athletes representation on every single commission. And I mean, it was not, I don't think, there was no warm welcome for Sarah when she showed up on the phone call. And I was actually criticized for having people that unknown to the board, I had invited people to the board meeting. Mm-hmm. First of all, I had never received anything during the whole time I served on the executive board that said, these people will be invited to the meeting.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Second of all, you forgot to add that the invited person was an athlete's rep. And they were really pissed that I used executive power to appoint Sarah. I was like, well, let's think about executive power here. I could have appointed the entire board.
Yeah.
Because there's no instruction on how to fill it. And there are, and according to the Constitution, I can appoint committee chairs. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to make sure we had an active committee chair. And boy, did I get that right. I will take credit there that I picked the right person for that job. She's far exceeded what you could expect from an individual athlete that's still in the mix. But we got together and we selected them as a group. Still not the right way to do it, but we had to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, had to do something.
Right. And, I didn't try to just put it all in my own lap. I completely cooperated with other individuals. We did reached out to all the member federations. If we could do everything this way, it would be great as a group doing the right things. So there were moments that I thought that we were heading in the right direction. But as soon as I appointed Sarah, they all jumped on me like hyenas. Mm-hmm. And then when she showed up to the meeting, now it's being, rewritten as I invited people who they didn't know were being invited to the meeting.
Even though that was standard precedent. Yeah.
So even if it was the athlete's rep, the problem is that I had picked the committee chair. And the next meeting, there were 2 athletes reps. And they weren't happy about that either, because then the other person, now they're saying he was appointed as vice chair, which is not true. The vice chair has just been elected by the executive board, by the athletes commission, right?
Yeah.
So, they just, I had appointed Fernando as an advisor, advisor to the president on athlete affairs.
Yeah.
Because I thought having a male voice from another continent would be helpful.
Yeah.
And I think that as a trio, they're extraordinary.
Yeah.
And honestly, the whole idea is for everybody on the commission to have a voice. Just not everybody can really use their voice because they don't have kind of the reach and the I mean, the great weightlifters, but, and they could really do some outreach in their own languages, in their own regions. And so I do think that even though we require like a conversational level of English, because English is the language of the executive board, it's not, or of the federation, sorry. There are plenty of people that don't actually speak English on our executive board. So it might be a fairly high standard to hold for the Athletes Commission. But I see all of them having a lot of utility in improving the sport and stating what they think is best. Ideally, in my opinion, we would have some members that are like on the Athletes Commission as actual executive board members, like put them on a slate to run as executive board members.
Yeah.
And then additionally, have athletes reps. I think that would be like, ideally, that's what I would like to see, because then you can really have, 4 or 5 athletes out of a 15 person body, 30% athlete representation. 20% should be the minimum.
Yeah.
And they don't all have to be active at this point. You can use the IOC criteria.
Well, Ursula, thank you so much for giving us a good amount of time. I don't know how long it's been, but it's definitely been more than the hour that I'd hoped. So massively appreciate it, because I know you're about as tired and busy as a person could possibly be at this point after the year that you've had.
I'm not busy enough because I quit my teaching job.
Right.
And so now I have to go back and do what I really love, which is coaching.
Well, that's good. That would be nice for you to go back and do that. Where can we send people to? I mean, your Instagram is great, but you make a point on there of saying like, this is me representing myself rather than any organization that I may have worked for. Where else can I send people, if anywhere?
That's all I have. I'm not a big social media person. I think if they want to be active in the athletes campaign, then there's that. I think if, I have an email, weightliftingwise@gmail.com. If they want to contact me directly, I'll probably be out doing weightlifting camps again.
Oh, cool.
So, I mean, that was what I had moved towards for quite a while. And I wrote my own course for coaches, and I've done it, in different countries and states across the United States. So yeah, I mean, weightliftingwise@gmail.com. They can contact me by email. I'm not getting the deluge of emails I used to get, so I can answer others. I think going to the IWF Athletes Commission page now, Sarah set up, and going through those channels if they're athletes and they want to make a positive impact. If they're just going to go on there to harass people, then we don't want you. And I'm not saying you can't have an alternate opinion. I'm just saying, give your alternate opinion to an alternate person. I don't expect resounding support from the countries. And in fact, there's a campaign going on at this point, to just slander and lie and rise in general, what I was trying to do. But that's okay. I've weathered quite a few storms in my life.
Greatest
I mean,
storms,
I'm a woman in the sport of weightlifting in the
right,
60s. Yeah. You don't, you got to get a little more thick-skinned. If you're gonna take on those roles. So.
Brilliant.
Anyways.
Well, I'll put links to all the things we've mentioned down below. I'll also put a link to I think it's called the IWF _athletics board, athlete board, or AB or something like that. This new
AC board. AC, it should be AC.
AC, yeah, that's the one. Yeah. I'll put a link to that down below. And so once again, thanks so much for coming on. And I know you don't like to hear it, but I do appreciate what you've been doing for the sport. And I know that there are
it's not that I don't like to hear it.
Others who do as well.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
it's an honor to work for the athletes and to work for the sport. It's a beautiful sport, and I love it.
For sure.
And I'm really sad to see what's happening.
Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you all next week.